of it was specifically geared towards the term limits piece for Congress. And this is obviously hypothetical, but the question is if this is enacted, are there any provisions in the bill, or would you be willing to put provisions in the bill to kind of, I guess, kind of further smooth or streamline the process for the change to take place with regard to changing, ending term limits or whatever the case may be, or imposing term limits?
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member, and through the chair. For the call that we're making, it is important that we match identically with other calls. So I think in terms of the wording on the resolution, it needs to stay as put. What you're referring to really goes into what is going to happen at the convention.
The Civil War, one of the driving factors of the Civil War was this whole issue of states' rights. The southern states wanted to assert their authority over the federal government so they could abolish federal laws that they did not support, especially laws interfering with the South's right to keep slaves and take them wherever they wished. So my question to you is, aren't you concerned that State A may choose to do whatever simply because they're not satisfied with a regulation that's been put forth by the federal government? Aren't you concerned about all of the various regulatory concerns that the federal government?
All right, folks, give me one moment here. Just just drop that off because I was getting some feedback and I wasn't sure if you were too. So I got rid of it. The clips that I was going to put in the ticker are going to be available in this broadcast anyway. So I didn't find it completely necessary to continue on with that in case it was playing a little bit wonky for you guys. So I'm going to give it a few minutes because normally the ticker will provide some notification to people, limited that it may be, as Facebook, YouTube, etc., do not always promote this broadcast, but I'm putting it out anyway. So there it is. If the other video is playing fine, my apologies for that anyway. But best to jump into it. We got some news from Convention Estates today regarding some progress in Ohio. Just got some updates as to some timelines for states like Iowa and Idaho, and it's important because a lot of what goes on, we go through the broadcast week in, week out, but legislative sessions only take place, once a year through specific months. So there's kind of like a season that legislation is pushing through. Ohio happens to be one of the rare birds that has full. They've got full legislative sessions all year round, and while that's probably unnecessary, as is demonstrated by most of the other states, some of them only meeting every other year. Which are showing to me when they meet every other year, to me it shows the states run pretty well, and that it testifies to two things. One, that the states running pretty well. I'm not saying Ohio's not running well, but I'm saying they're probably doing a little too much on the government side. If they need to be there all year, it's probably a telltale sign that they're doing a little too much, because it should not be that way. It should not, if states like Texas and whatnot can do a few months a year, Texas might actually be every other year. I'm not even sure. One of the beauties of this great nation is that each state is sovereign, so they pick their own rules. But nonetheless, one of the good things about Ohio going all year round is that it gives us some headway and some ability to be able to get some progress, right, during what otherwise would be down months. And why, it's always good to see progress. So what they did recently, and I believe this was 2 days ago, might have been, I'm not even sure. I had it come up in a live feed. It came up while I was working, so I didn't get to watch it the full thing till later. But they showed Convention of States Project on YouTube, showed the the uh, the hearing, and it was the proponents hearing, right? We're waiting on the proponents hearing. This was them proposing to the committee to get a proponents hearing, meaning they have in Ohio, the way they do it is one hearing would be scheduled after this. If all went well here, they'll schedule a proponent meeting, meaning everyone on the pro side gets to speak out. And then if all goes well there, they're here. Even if all doesn't go well there, they'll hear at that point an opponents meeting. And that's where communist organizations, and I say this truthfully because this is how it always goes down in every state. Um, Soros groups, communist organizations, example, Media Matters, the Women's League for something, I forget what it was, but you can tell when you look at their website, it's clearly a globalist type of organization. John Birch Society, which does side with Soros and the rest of them on this point of Convention of States, despite having spent their own time in the early days proposing a Convention of States. So they'll hear all those people the second time around. And then if it passes committee, there are 13 people on the Ohio committee for this particular committee. That would mean 7 votes need to go in favor. And I'm going to get into some of the clips of the questions that were asked during this hearing because it makes a point that I've been trying to make for a very long time. And, people ask me all the time, like, yeah, this all sounds great, George, but, how long has this been and how long does it take? And how long do we have to go through this to get these other states on board? If you're not aware, we have 19 on board right now. So with 19 on board, you would say, okay, well, when we need 34, right? We need 34 to be on board to call the convention. That would be 2/3 of the states, as stated in the Constitution. So that's that, right? So that's where that goes. And sorry, I'm trying to get this pulled up so that it streams on my website, and I'm trying to do it while I'm talking, which is probably not the best way to do it. But when you're flying solo, and you may often hear me say we or us, or it's just me, folks. It's just me. But anyway, the point is they had this hearing, and what you hear from these legislators is pure curiosity. So, and when I say curiosity, I used to bash state legislators for not knowing. I used to bash them for not understanding. I used to bash them for, but I've come to change my opinion on that. And I've changed it really for a very specific reason. And that reason is that state legislators are very different animals than your, than your politicians in like the federal government, per se. And because a lot of people equate the two and they say, well, a politician's a politician, but it's not the same. State legislators are literally just average folks who just ran for the sake of bettering their state. And in most cases, they're not paid much. They don't make a lot of side money. I think it was New Hampshire where they make like $100 a year because the fee for the state legislator, or the payroll for the state legislator, was set back in the 1700s and they never gave themselves a raise. They always just considered it service. But every state's a little different. But in the end, right, I mean, you go to New York City and you'll see some people who are kind of power hungry, maybe, not everyone though. And but in the end, my point is they're regular folks. And as regular folks, I decided, look, there is no, you can run for state legislator for all the right reasons and represent a district and be good hearted and have good intentions and not understand the ins and outs of Article 5 and the calling of a convention of states. It's never been done before. While I feel like I have some level of mastery of it, I still learn new concepts, as we go. But I mean, compared to the average Joe, I would say I have some level of mastery of it, and how it works and what the arguments are for and against, etc. But it wasn't long ago, just a few years ago. I didn't know really. I mean, I knew that Article 5 addressed how to amend the Constitution. I had no idea that there was a second clause, that the second clause would be what it meant. I kind of read through it and just kind of breezed through it, and that was that. So, and if I decided at some point to run for a state legislative position, I don't feel like it would make me, not love the country as much or hurt me in a way of my character. So I try not to judge these legislators when they ask these types of questions. But I want to highlight them for you because I want to bring forth the importance of our engagement. And because this happens, now I play all the time the clip that I took some year or so ago, and I want to say it was from South Carolina. It was from one of the 4 states that came on last year. So was it West Virginia, Wisconsin, South Carolina, and now the 4th one is escaping me. But it was from one of those 4 states, and the 2 legislators were talking on the floor, the sponsors of the bill, and they were talking. Well, one was a sponsor, one was listening, or was on the committee. They're talking, I don't even remember if it was a committee hearing, but anyway, they both brought up the same thing, and it was something that I hear in virtually every state debate that I watch, and it's those who are in favor will always say one thing, that I was against this before I read my way into being for it. And Ohio is proving to be no different. If we're going to win Ohio, it is going to be paramount that the people of Ohio reach out to their district legislators. All right. That's the person, for those who don't understand local politics, where you live is put into a district. All right. Every state is different. How many people are there based on population, etc. But you're all in a district, and you have a representative, a House representative that represents you in your state legislature. And that person represents only your district, not your entire state. All right. Their only concern is that district. So what they need to hear is that you are in support of convention of states. Now, if you live in Ohio, an easy way to start that ball rolling is to go to the Convention of States website link. I have the link to it right on my front page at thepatriotthinktank.com. And I also put the patriotthinktank.com in the description for all streams, right? So it should be there for everybody from Rumble to Facebook to YouTube to Twitch to Twitter, should be everywhere. Okay. Go there right on the front page to sign the petition. You click that, you sign the petition. Hopefully you will click the volunteer button so you can really engage someone local to you. But just by signing the petition, a letter will be sent to your representative on your behalf, showing that you support convention of states. And it's important to understand that, and the task really for us is to get, each person that hears this, all right, and goes and signs that petition. If you pass that to 10 of your friends, right, it's likely, if you're patriot and constitutionally minded, that you have friends that are patriots and constitutionally minded. You may have some of the, traditional Democrats. That's fine. As long as they're patriots and constitutionally minded, that's fine. You may even have some Marxists as friends. Most of them, don't really understand much. And if you can explain to them what this is about, you'll find out that they're in support as well, because these topics are universal, right? There's no, I showed that statistic many times from that poll that was done, right? Where if you look here, 50.2%, I'm focused on the Democrats here, 50.2% of Democrats are in support. But more important than that number is the 24.2 that aren't sure, okay? I forever told you guys based on the concepts of mass formation and conformity studies, that it's likely about 30% of the population who really fall into that Marxist camp. And it's those people that make up this 25.6%. The way I read this is 74.2% of Democrats now do not oppose term limits, limits to federal power, and fiscal restraints. So even if you have friends who are on the Democratic side of the aisle, if they're the types of folks who are Kennedy Democrats, if you will, and they still love this country, and they're not in the camp of saying America is always the evil, America is the problem, then they can join. This is not a partisan. It's not a partisan thing, right? And but when you listen to these legislators talk about it, the true ignorance, and I don't mean this and again, I don't mean this in a negative way, right? I don't mean like calling them ignorant is like the same as other people, meaning it as stupid. That's not what I mean. But their ignorance is widespread. They truly don't understand what Article 5 is. They don't understand, and I'm going to show you in one of these clips, they don't understand exactly how this country was designed to run. And I don't blame them per se, because we have all, as I have discussed many times, been deprived of civics. All of us. Going all the way back to the late 60s. It was replaced with social studies, right? Think about that if that's the first time you're hearing it. If you watch me regularly, you've heard this a million times. But it was replaced with social studies. And social studies, while it does incorporate pieces of civics, it's not civics. It's social studies. It goes off on all kinds of tangents. It doesn't focus and dial in on our government and how it was designed to work and how it was designed to operate, how a bill gets passed, all of that. It's not it, and they were deprived of this the same way everyone else was. If you understand civics today, if you're a person who understands, the fact that the states are sovereign and the fact that the states are in control of the federal government, if you're that person, that means you taught it to yourself, because the schools aren't going to teach that to you. You either taught it to yourself or you got that unicorn in college. And I did have one of those unicorns of a professor who actually taught straight from the hip and didn't have an agenda and didn't have, any hidden stuff going on, was just teaching it straight out. I was blessed enough to have one of those professors who was teaching a class, History of American Government, which I took instead of Poli-Sci 2, and I am so glad that I did, because it set me on my path for future knowledge about this country and how it works, and how, it did send me on that path. But most of us are not that lucky. I could have easily not seen that class and taken Poli-Sci 2 and just walked away saying, it's all an indoctrination center, which is what I said about my Poli-Sci 1 class. So I don't hold these legislators necessarily responsible for their ignorance. However, it is the job of every one of us to educate them going forward. First of all, ask yourself truthfully. It's not a quiz. I'm not coming at you with this, right? But if you leave in the comments, no matter what platform you're watching on, leave in the comments if you know who your state legislator is. If you know who your local legislator is, leave it in the comments. Okay? Or even what district you're in. And don't be ashamed, right? If you don't know. If I don't see any comments come through, I understand. Because we've all been raised to think that way. So I'm painting this picture, and I'm putting this out there for the sake of the clips that I want to show, because the natural reaction to hearing, if you understand Article 5, right? If you understand how it works, if you understand, the ins and outs, you'd realize how silly these questions are. But if you don't understand, which these state legislators don't. Now, the idea that, and again, I could go to any of the hearings, right? Going into anywhere. I'm just picking these three because they were the first three I saw on this debate. and I admire their curiosity because they weren't coming out in a way like it doesn't look to me anyway like these are people who have been armed up by JBS or JBS, right, or George Soros or any Common Cause or any of those groups. They were sincerely didn't understand this process and they sincerely wanted to understand. So that's a plus for our status in Ohio because anybody who wants to seriously understand will eventually arrive at the path that this needs to happen. And not only that it needs to happen, but it needs to happen now. Right? So here's the first one. She had two questions. I may cut it off a little bit into the response because I can give the response. Anybody in grassroots can give the response to this. But I want to get into why the questions like if these legislators had done any homework prior to coming in, and again, I'm not bashing them for that either. Like Lord knows they may not even know where to start, where to look, where you can go and you can read Article 5, but you get into all the debate information and all that, and all the people that are attacking and the people that are supporting, and it can get confusing. It's if you got professionals that you're about to meet with, it kind of makes sense to wait and get it from them. But here's her questions. We'll start with.
I wanted to know what has been some of the feedback from, I'm assuming, and I'm sure you probably have, but some of the feedback from constituents that you have talked to about HJR 3. And then I'll ask the second question after you respond.
Thank you for the question through the chair. This is an issue that in my district, when I go around and talk to people in Ohio, unilaterally, federal government is out of control. No question. That is the consensus of my constituents. When we talk about the resolution, and I think that there are questions out there about calling a convention of states. This is not a common occurrence for the federal government, for Congress to do. Now a convention is not a unique idea. They happen regularly between states. There's much historical precedence for a convention. I think that the average individual in the state of Ohio knows the federal government is out of control, is looking for opportunities to rein them in, knowing that what we've tried in the past through elections, electing the right people, is not getting us to where we need to be. And once this Article 5 is explained, I've gotten overwhelming support. So that's my personal experience.
If I could say also, Ranking Member, people at this point are just looking for a method to get back something that they feel like they've lost. Whether that is through the regulations that have come down, the things that, as Representative McLean said, the state typically is required to do because of federal funding and the trickle down that comes in there. But they're also looking for ways to ensure that their families and their future and their children and their grandchildren will have a country that they can count on financially that has not just crumbled under the weight of its own debt. And so by and large, although there is a definite education process on what this really means, when someone tells you, how are you helping me when it comes to all of this federal government overreach and the things that are happening, my answer back to them is, have you ever looked at Article 5 of the Constitution? And then explaining very simply that that is how the states actually take the power back, so that then your local elected and state elected representatives can actually do things better for you at the local and state level. They get that, but you're right. I think what you're getting at is there's definitely going to be an education process of what this means for our voters and the people in Ohio.
Your next question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your responses. The next question is just kind of, it was specifically geared towards the term limits piece for Congress. And this is obviously hypothetical, but the question is if this is enacted, are there any provisions in the bill, or would you be willing to put provisions in the bill to kind of, I guess, kind of further smooth or streamline the process for the change to take place with regard to changing, ending term limits or whatever the case may be, or imposing term limits?
All right, I'm going to stop it there. All right, I'll tell you what he's about to say because it was getting a little lengthy. But so basically, if you listen to the question she asked, right? Number one, it's what do your constituents think about this? Now, again, this is something where, as I mentioned before, each of these individuals represent a district. It really doesn't matter what his constituents, if he's there proposing this, then he's clearly of the opinion that, and as having spoken to his constituents, that they are in favor. Her concern should be, what do my constituents think, right? And again, this is where we come in, right? Because the people of Ohio, like her constituents, if they're being educated to this process, if she starts to get these emails coming in from people signing this petition and saying that they're all for it, that should answer that question for her, right? But the second question is more what I was waiting for. And number one, she calls it a bill. Now, it's not a bill, right? It's a resolution. Maybe you could call it a petition, but it's not a bill. All right. This doesn't have to be signed by the governor. The governor's not involved in this whatsoever. This is strictly state legislators. There's no governors. There's nothing else. All right. So this resolution that is up to be passed, she's asking about the term limits provision and asking what will you put in the resolution? I'll correct that for her to explain how that transition will take place. And again, her question was an honest, sincere question. So this is where I say I'm not going to get on people for not understanding, right? Legislators in that sense. But what concerns, if you like, for those who wonder why this takes so long, like that's a very 101, like Convention of States 101 question. That if there were a room full of the greenest and newest grassroots folks, right, out of the millions of grassroots folks that we have on board now, if they were the greenest, newest ones to join, they would be raising their hands emphatically, like, ooh, 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 let me answer. And that's my concern. My concern is, the responsibility for this obviously rests with the individual legislator, but it also rests with us. It also rests with us to be able to educate these folks and help to provide them the materials and the source material to get with these people, right? She's got a district. Her district, I don't know how many people are in it, but I know that it's not an overwhelming amount. It's Ohio. So it's not, it's not San Francisco where a district might have 700,000 people in it. Like this district likely has somewhere around 50 or 100,000 people in it, which is manageable. And if just 20 of those constituents approach her or schedule time with her to provide her with this, I've told the story of the one legislator who stepped up. He was telling the story about, again, how he was against it before he read up and became for it. But it was one constituent that scheduled some time with him, which you can do with your state legislators. They do meet with constituents. It's not like Congress where they think they're above everybody. That's not how the state legislators work. So, I mean, they're busy, so it may take some time to get on their calendar, but in the end, you can get on their calendar. And this one constituent sat down with someone who was blocking the bill for years. The bill, now she's got me doing it, was blocking the resolution for years. And he ended up becoming in full support, in adamant support, all because he sat down with one of his constituents over some tea. And that individual basically asked him, how do you feel about Convention of States? He's led off by being honest. I generally am against it, but honestly, I don't really understand. I don't really know much about it. Well, the constituent was prepared, handed him materials like Rob Nadelson's The Law of Article 5, excellent book explaining the historical context of a lot of what's involved in an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments. And he gave him this source material and asked one thing. He said, please promise me that you will read this. That's all I'm asking. I'm not asking you to be in favor of this and to support what I'm telling you. He's like, I want you, if you read this, and you get from it what I and millions of others have gotten from it, then I will ask for your support. And sure enough, he was telling the story in the context of being on the floor supporting an Article 5 convention of states. Every state that has come aboard, virtually every state, has had that moment, has had those people who this has never been done before. So they don't understand it. And the end game is once we get this through, once we bulldoze our way through educating these representatives on what this is and why it's important and why it is so important, why it is such an amazing solution, why it is such a shifting of power, and why it is so important that we get through this process. Once we get through it, this education process for legislators won't be necessary anymore. When there are clear-cut issues like the border, right? The border is not on the current call for a convention of states. It's not on the resolutions and petitions that are being filed right now. It's not. It's still in the Constitution, the responsibility of the federal government. I can do a whole nother broadcast on how they've been dropping the ball there, right? I think you would all agree in that sense that the federal government has been horrifically bad at executing the border and the security to the point where it feels, certainly does, that it's intentional, right? And that's just where we're at today. But when this convention is completed, there's nothing, we don't necessarily have to amend the Constitution again just to get, the border security done. The mere threat of it at that point is most likely going to be enough. Like if they do something like the border, or maybe they overstep privacy concerns and it didn't get addressed in the first convention. If those types of things happen and they start to see the bubble up going on, because the millions of people that are involved in this don't just disappear after a calling of a convention and the process is completed. Those people are still around, and they're going to be right there to politely harass their local legislators on the issues that bother them on a federal level. And if the federal government starts to see, well, 2 states have called for convention on border security, 3 states, 10 states have called for convention on to address border security, 25 states they'll act. They'll act, because if there's anything that the federal government does not want, anything. Think of all the creepy crap that they've wanted. The one thing that they do not want is to have more power taken away. Forcibly at that. Anybody who's in Congress, anybody who's in the presidency during something like that, during an event like that is so incompetent that they can't take action to the point where it has to be done through the states again, is going to be looked at in the lens of history as being just that, completely incompetent. That is exactly how it will look. So that power, that muscle flex that the people will now have will make it all worth it. But none of that can happen until we educate our local legislators. Imagine how, and this is not new, that legislators don't understand such concepts. 1913, the local legislatures of the United States of America ratified amendments that forevermore from that point, seriously disabled this nation on all fronts. They passed income tax, which was forever shot down by the Supreme Court because it was unconstitutional until they went ahead and added in something to make it constitutional. And the 17th Amendment, where the state legislators handed over their authority to appoint federal senators and ratified the 17th Amendment. Oh, there was a special bunch of dootaroos around the nation back then. Really, in that 1 year. I mean, talk about a ripe climate for the worst president in human history Woodrow Wilson. Tell me what you want about Biden, but I'm telling you, when it comes to, I mean, Biden's, if I thought Biden was really making the decisions, I might put him up there. But for such long-lasting damage to the United States, the crown goes to Woodrow Wilson, without a doubt. And then on Christmas Eve of that same year, the day before Christmas Eve, he signs the Fed into existence. The long-lasting damage of Woodrow Wilson is unfathomable. But it's been done. It's been done. And so now we have legislators, at least this group here, and I'm going to get into the next guy. So the next guy, he's going to bring up an argument that's completely off the wall. All right. But, and you may listen to it as a supporter and say, what the hell is this guy talking about? But I'm going to ask you to approach it from the same way that I asked you to approach the first one. It's that he doesn't understand what an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments is. He doesn't understand it. It's completely foreign to him. Like, we're starting from scratch. And these folks are on the committee. All right. The three folks that I'm showing you now, and there are others with some questions like that. The three folks that I show you today are all on, that's 3 out of 13 on that committee that we have to educate from absolute scratch right now during the process of trying to get this past committee. But listen to this gentleman's argument, and then I will opine on it once it is done.
The Civil War, one of the driving factors of the Civil War was this whole issue of states' rights. The southern states wanted to assert their authority over the federal government so they could abolish federal laws that they did not support, especially laws interfering with the South's right to keep slaves and take them wherever they wished. So my question to you is, aren't you concerned that State A may choose to do whatever simply because they're not satisfied with a regulation that's been put forth by the federal government? Aren't you concerned about all of the various regulatory concerns that the federal government is like a protection, air quality, water quality, food inspection, and on and on and on? So if every state had its own regulations, aren't you concerned that that could cause a serious problem? Banking regulations, all of that, aren't you concerned about that?
The other places where I mentioned states' rights many times, because they're mentioned in the U.S. Constitution also. And the idea here is not necessarily that we're opening Pandora's box to say that, well, the states are just going to be able to do whatever they want. We're saying that the founding fathers said, hey, you know what? We need a safety valve inside our own Constitution that tells the states, whenever they all disagree that the government is moving in the right direction, that they have the ability to actually change the Constitution. So, similar to the voters in Ohio making an amendment to the Constitution of Ohio because of something that they wanted, something that they saw that was desperately needed inside.
All right, so you get the point there. The gentleman brings up the Civil War, and then, ties it back in, and to the states. What about the states that basically he was insinuating states that still want slavery or still wanted slavery could petition? Like, he just doesn't understand Article 5. Like, he thinks that that by doing this, like, states can act unilaterally against regulations and things of that nature. You could argue you'd have to go to the Declaration of Independence to kind of make that argument, but that's not the argument that's being made here. The argument for Article 5 does not allow individual states to just go off and do, make requests that are bizarre and crazy like that. And what the gentleman goes on to explain, he was one of the co-sponsors of the bill. And I would say on the upside, there are 23 co-sponsors. I believe it was 23, right? Yeah, it was 23 co-sponsors. Or 21 co-sponsors to this bill in Ohio, or to this resolution in Ohio. Now this lady's got me calling it a bill, and I'm like, so I'm like hanging myself here with this. But you know, but in the end, he's asking, all right, he's asking what would stop the states from going rogue. And again, if you're even a novice to the Article 5 Convention of States movement, you've got to be sitting there with your hand in the air like, ooh, 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 pick me when it comes to answering that question. But the individual who's actually in the state legislature and on this committee does not know the answer to that question. So, and again, it's our job to educate these folks, right? It's our job to steer him in the direction of the correct reading materials, like Nadelson's book, The Law of Article 5, or maybe Federalist Paper 40, if the argument is that someone's saying the original convention was a runaway convention. Like for things like that, there is source material out there that can be given that can help him understand exactly what it is that this is, and why an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments exists, why that option is even there, so that he can then absorb that information. And if he had done that, if that had happened before this committee met, he wouldn't have asked that question. He wouldn't have asked that question. But he also brings up another concern, not sure if you caught it, where he goes on to say, well, wouldn't it become crazy if the states were making up their own rules for regulations, and starts to list off a ton of things that are powers of the government today that are not listed in the Bill of Rights, that are clearly not supposed to be government powers today. And he goes into, and I'm sure if left alone, he'd get into even more stuff about it. Like, that was a concern. And that's a concern because this man has grown up his whole life with the federal government in control of these things. Like, he literally does not understand that not only would it not be chaos, not only can the states manage their own environmental policy, not only can the states manage, their own utilities and their own education, their own everything. They're supposed to. They're supposed to. And the sponsors had brought up, and I didn't take the clip of it, but in the very beginning, when they were talking about the resolution and they went to introduce it to these guys, they brought up the fact that we can no longer live as a state at the purse strings of the federal government. And by that, they meant too many times. And he said this, and everybody was in, nobody argued it. He said too many times. How many times, he says, are we in legislation and we're debating a particular topic, and somewhere it comes up, but what about the federal money? And this is not something unique to Ohio. This happens in all 50 states. And the federal government has essentially taken our money, dangled it back over the states' heads, got them hooked on it like a drug. Of course, every penny that comes from the feds, which really is coming from us, but every time it makes that filter through the feds to get back to the states, there are strings attached. And the states have to follow those policies. If you wonder how on earth could our schools get so out of control? Well, they've gotten out of control because good-hearted legislators who wanted to do the right thing and thought that they were helping their districts by getting this money, like, had taken the money and then became dependent on it. And here's the thing, folks, and it's another educational process for many of our state legislators around the country. 19 states do not have this problem. They're already on board and they already understand federalism and they already understand how this government was designed to work. But what this process is exposing is how many do not. I can assure you, if you ask the majority of them, they would tell you because state law trumps federal law trumps state law, that somehow puts the federal government in a position of power over the states. It does not. It does not. The idea that the federal government is a child of the states, it exists only by the will of the states. The federal government was created by the states. And the states, by constitution, can do whatever they want to the federal government. This provision, this clause in Article 5 is designed, you may hear people say all the time, well, the Supreme Court is the final word. They're the final, arbiter. They're not. They're not. We are. This was demonstrated in a negative way in 1913, when the courts had forever stricken down income tax. Even the one time that they enacted income tax during the Civil War, because we were in a position where not enacting it would have ended up blowing the whole thing up, and we would have just, it wouldn't matter what's in the Constitution because we wouldn't be under it anymore. But as soon as the war ended, they retracted it because it was widely understood that it was not constitutional. Why? Because the courts deemed it not constitutional. Why did they deem it that way? Because it wasn't. So what did progressives do? They amended the Constitution. Why? Because, and the people allowed it. Okay, don't think like they did it without the people's consent. They instilled enough fear in the people that they would have to raise tariffs and do all of these things. But if only you let us tax the very, very wealthy, 0.3%, whatever the hell it was, we all know how that ended, right? We see the tax structure right now. So now we know better. We learned from that history. We learned that we gave them an inch and they took 20 miles. So the courts are not the final word. We are, right? These folks and these legislators don't understand this. This is all new to them. But it's not new to us, right? It's not new. I mean, maybe it's new to some people watching, right? Maybe it's new. I don't know. It shouldn't be. And if it was new, it's not new after today for you. This entire system was designed, this entire constitutional republic was absolutely designed to be run from the bottom up, from the local legislator representing that district on up, not the other way around. But yet here we are, patriots and Marxists alike, clamoring around for a president, thinking that if this president doesn't get elected, then it's all over. Of course, it's not over, right? And it's important to put this back in the perspective of the American experiment, because that is what this is. The American experiment has not ended. It is ongoing. And this may be a dark time in that experiment. We have had dark times before. But that's all it is. Doesn't matter who gets elected president next if we get these things through. Well, it matters, I guess, to some degree, because they can still leave the borders open. We need Trump for those reasons. But Trump's not going to save the country. He could seal the borders. Yes, he could deal with foreign affairs, that's great. But in the end, the debt did not go down $1 during, as a matter of fact, it escalated during his presidency. Because it escalates during every presidency. Because the government is structurally broken. There's nothing that it's not Trump's fault. There's nothing that a U.S. president can do to correct those things. We have to do that. We have to do it. But nobody wants to take responsibility for that. We think that we insist that we should just be able to go to the election booth and handle it. But that's not how this works. That's not how the republic works. That's not how any of it's designed to work when you're dealing with what we're dealing with right now. You've got a Congress full of people. I gave Matt Gaetz all the credit in the world for some of the things that he did, but nothing that he did more did I give him credit for than continually speaking about his own constituents. As one pundit after another, even the Mark Levins and these other, and Mark Levin has forgotten more about the Constitution than I may ever know, but even he was bashing Gaetz as if Gaetz is supposed to be this arbiter for the betterment of the country. He's not. And it seems like only Gaetz and a handful of other people in Congress understand that. Gaetz's responsibility are to the people in Gaetz's district. That's it. He does not hold responsibility for what the Republican Party can do or can't do. He does not hold responsibility for how well Congress functions. He doesn't owe them anything. And in a situation where the majority is so slim, a lot of power goes to an individual district. And that's how it should be. It's not always going to be like that, but it's that way now. And the fact that it is, that doesn't mean that Gaetz now ignores his district and his constituents because, well, we don't have a big enough majority. So you need to just get on board against the interests of your district. No. If you listen to these House representatives, or even the good ones that you might like, you listen to them talk, they rarely mention their constituents. Rarely. When you listen to state legislators talk, ignorant or not, they're always mentioning their constituents. Always. They're always talking about, well, I had a constituent call my office. You never hear that kind of talk on the federal floor, ever. And that's why our focus needs to be on these state legislators. Now, I'm going to get into this last one here. This one, again, look at this through the eyes of ignorance, right? He just doesn't know. He just doesn't know. And this happens every time in every state that we're trying to get on board. The more I watch these, look, I'm that wonky dude. I sit there and watch these things so that you don't have to. But you should watch them too. And by the way, every clip that I've taken here is available in one long stream, and there's actually more information from Rita Peters and Company, as well as some others. There was Catherine Zemanek, who is a regional director at COS, who spoke on that video. You can watch it in its entirety at the Convention Estates Project channel on YouTube or Rumble. All right. And I encourage you to do so because it's great information. Subscribe when you get there because you want those alerts. You want that stuff. And finally, something meaningful pops up in your freaking notifications, right? But of course, I will always have these conversations when there's new stuff coming up with Convention Estates. So, but let's get into this last question to finally just slam home this point once again, where this gentleman just doesn't know.
I'm trying to understand. There seems to be some ambiguity because I'm looking. When you were testifying, I looked into the Convention Estates, and currently in our Constitution, there really isn't any process in terms of delegate selection. There just seems to be like an absence of rules related to how the process will take place. Doesn't that raise any serious concerns for you all about potential undemocratic and unrepresentative amendments being proposed and ratified? Because there just really isn't any rules to figure out beyond the one person, one state, one person. Beyond that, there really isn't much else in terms of the structure of how this would even happen. What are the rules in place for states to abide by? And I'm hearing you say that each state has agreed on the language that's presented in the current bill that you all are introducing. I haven't seen every single state's resolution. Are you sure every single resolution passed by the other 19 states is the same verbiage?
All right. So, a couple of things with him as well, right? So, number one, he's asking him, I don't see anything in the Constitution about how these delegates are selected. Again, in my opinion, the grassroots around the country are all raising their hands again to answer this question. Ooh, I got it. Stumbling over each other, to try and answer it first, which is fine. The fact that he doesn't know this, it doesn't scare me. It just means he needs to, we need to educate him. I'm sure this man has, and the woman and the other gentleman, I'm sure they have strengths in a variety of areas of education. I'm not saying they're idiots. They just don't understand Article 5, and it's too important for us to continue on this way, having state legislators who don't understand it. And if we come across them, we have to educate them. So he's asking, how are these delegates? There's nothing in there that says how the delegates are selected. No, there aren't. They're technically commissioners, but we'll go with the delegates because it is a popular term that's used. So, and now the sponsors are about to explain to him, that how the delegates are selected is not in the Constitution, because the whole point of this is the acknowledgement of state sovereignty. The states themselves have different processes for just about everything that they do. Perfect example is that Ohio, who has term limits, by the way, on the state level, but Ohio runs all year round. Most states do not. Most states have we have 99 chambers across this country. You might say, well, why aren't there 100? There are 50 states. There should be a House and Senate in every state. Well, no. Nebraska decided to have one chamber. So now there's 99. So the point is, they're different in every state. And the Constitution and the founders understood this. It was not a question of how, pick whoever, use whatever process, pick lollipops if you want. Whatever the process that state deems satisfactory to pick delegates to represent them is what they pick. One state can pick 10 delegates to go represent them. They still only get one vote. I know he said one vote, one state, one person. I know what he meant, and he did say it. He did clarify it later. I don't have that in the clip, but he did say one state, one vote later. But no matter how many delegates they pick, they still only get one vote. But maybe one state decides, you know what, we want a decent amount of minds, working on this. We want a decent amount of minds internally, right, debating our position as to what the language of a proposed amendment should be. So they may pick 10. Another state may pick 2. Another state may say, you know what, we got the most brilliant guy in the world. We're just sending him. It's completely up to the states. Now, this is convention of states, like basic knowledge, but it's not if you never heard it before, right? So these legislators are trying, honestly, to wrap their heads around what it is that the people are asking them to do. But again, it falls on us. It falls on each of those individuals. It falls on their constituents in particular. But for all of us, trust me when I tell you, if you're in a state that is not one of the 19, then it's a good chance that your legislator in your district doesn't understand it either. And so the way to remedy that is to get in touch with that person and educate them and provide them, it doesn't have to be you telling them everything about it, because there's so much to tell, but you can provide them with the materials. Because I can tell you, Kenneth Quinn, who had that channel, All Things Article 5, I had him on the broadcast once, and he's gone to these hearings. He did a brilliant breakdown of why we need a convention of states at one of these. I think it was West Virginia. I'm not sure where exactly he was when he did that. I don't quote me on that. But anyway, he did a brilliant piece on it. Right, it was one of the best that I've heard from the testimonials from constituents. But even he knew that, like in the end, he came in there specifically. Now, his channel, by the way, All Things Article 5. If you're one of those people who don't understand JBS, John Birch Society, and you think that it's this great conservative organization because you agree with them on most points, and you're wondering why they would be so against Article 5, his channel is a phenomenal one to break down and destroy their argument on Article 5. It's phenomenal. So I would recommend everybody go check that out as well. I don't know if he's still putting out content, but they're definitely worth going in there and checking out. But anyway, so he asked about the delegates. Again, I feel like he should have known that, but it's fine. They did a good job explaining it to him. Hopefully he takes that and walks away with it, and that's the point of these debates, right? So that we can help make, clear the air for any of these things. The one positive thing here is none of the stuff that they were asking, as rudimentary as the questions were, none of it was really John Birch Society stuff. Like none of it was really the poisonous Soros stuff or any of that runaway convention, this, that, and whatever. They didn't really go down that road. None of them did. Now that will happen when they do the opponents hearing. So they do a proponents hearing. We're waiting for them to schedule that. Then an opponents hearing. And you could bet John Birch will be there. You can bet the Soros groups, National League of Women, all of that stuff will be there to try and shoot this down. But they didn't make any of those points, which tells me that it's likely that they have not encountered those folks yet. So I'm a little nervous that when they do encounter those folks, that they're not educated enough on this topic to be able to debunk that stuff. So right now is a point where we really should be arming them with information so that they understand it, and it'll sound just as crazy to them as it does to everybody else who understands it when those folks make those arguments. But again, you listen. You've heard those three individuals make their points, and when you hear, and what I'm trying to get across, and the reason why I wanted to focus this whole broadcast on this is because I can't hit home enough that it's on us. That we are the champions of liberty. If you love liberty, okay, if you love this wonderful experiment that has its ups and downs and ebbs and flows as we went. But if you want it to continue on and continue to grow and continue to get better, right? It's constantly been getting better. We had a hiccup in 1913 for sure, with the 16th and 17th Amendments and the Fed being created. But then we had some great things come after that. I mean, the most of the amendments, with the exception of those two, 16 and 17, and prohibition, but then we repealed it, so it's okay. But with the exception of those, it's been a pretty good ride, and we've rectified maybe not every wrong, but a lot of the wrongs. But at the same time, we've also, through the Supreme Court, have allowed the government to grow in power almost endlessly. I mean, we're at the point now where when it comes down to what can be taxed and what can't, I mean, the Supreme Court pretty much has accepted the precedent that the federal government can do whatever it wants to do with taxes. And it's insane. But they allow it. They allow it. And the thing is, just because they allow it doesn't mean we have to allow it. Right? And again, the broad picture here is the power shift. It's the power shift. I guarantee you that the George Soroses of the world, the Klaus Schwabs, the Yuval Hararis and Larry Finks, there is nothing that they fear more, right? Xi Jinping, right? Putin, There's nothing these people fear more than a convention of states. Nothing. You won't hear them talking about it because they're already in a position where most of you don't understand it. So they're not trying to bring it to the table in a negative light, because if Soros comes out publicly rather than send his minions to these floor debates, if he came out publicly and started bashing convention of states, by instinct conservatives would start rallying. Just because anything you didn't understand from the person telling you, you would instantly trust that person by way of knowing that Soros hates this, and if Soros hates this, it must be good. How many of you fell in love with Donald Trump after some thought? Some of you say I was on from the beginning, but many people jumped on board after they realized the Republicans hated him too. When people came to the realization that the Republicans hated Trump too, they realized this guy must be over the target, right? Because he's getting flack from all sides. He must be over the target. When all those Republicans that we all hate but managed to get in anyway, the Mitch McConnells, right? Those folks, when they all get into, when they all turn to Mitt Romney and, et cetera, when these guys all turn on someone, instinctively, you start to like that person they're turning on. And it's no different here. Soros he knows this. And I could tell you, we're not far away from them letting that go. Like when we get to 25 states, right? And I will tell you that in that video, that regional director, let me get her name so I don't sell her short, Catherine Zamanek, regional director for COS, and the states of Idaho, Iowa, and Ohio, and probably others fall under her leadership as regional director. She had mentioned that. Let me see. I took a few notes here. So we're waiting. So she was explaining there's good stuff coming in Iowa. It passed in committee. Okay, so in both the House and the Senate. So if you're not familiar with how most state legislatures work, like this Ohio one is being proposed to the committee now. We're hoping it passes committee. But the way that a bill is made is it has to pass committee. Once it passes committee, and the House and Senate will each have a committee. So once it passes committee, it then goes to the main floor of the House, okay, or the Senate, depending on the respective committee. Well, with respect to Iowa, it's passed in both committees, House and Senate. So it will be hitting the floor on the House and the Senate there, okay? And she's thinking now Iowa, unlike Ohio, is not all year round. So you'll notice the sparks really start to fly on this channel with movement in January. Okay, that's when all the legislatures start coming back to session. That's when things start to heat up, and we can start to focus on the states that have this legislation coming. So in this upcoming month, it's important again that everybody be in tune, that you be dialed in with your district and get as many of your friends involved as possible. Get a case of beer, everybody hang out, bring over 10 friends or so, everybody hang out, have a little party, but before you start getting too drunk, write a handwritten letter to your legislator. This was something we did here in California. I think it's a phenomenal thing to do. The response from legislators has been phenomenal. When asked about that, what happens when you get a handwritten letter, they all say handwritten letters stand out, right? And you can understand that, right? If you were going into your mail and you see an envelope that's written in by hand, it jumps out at you as opposed to all the other junk in that box. And if you open it up and there's a paper in there that's written by hand, again, you're going to read that. You're going to read that because somebody took the time to sit down and write that out by hand. And the only reason to do something like that is to give the impression this is important. And so you have these little parties and you send off these letters to your representatives, and like they get read. They get read. It's not like a letter to Santa Claus. These get read. Well, maybe Santa's reading them. I don't know. Still like to keep that dream going, but nonetheless, little things like that, little actions, right? Where people say, "I don't have time. I don't have time." You have time to do that. You have time to do that. And the thing is, you don't even necessarily need to do that. What you need to do is click the volunteer button and let somebody who's local to you, who lives in your district, let them reach out to you and tell you, hey, how things are going in your district. Maybe your district's already on board. Maybe your state is already signed on. Maybe, you're right on the cusp of signing on. But now is the time to get involved, because it's about to heat up again. A month from now, it's going to start heating up again. And you want to be ahead of that, right? You want to be ahead of that, so that when they bring this to the floor, that your legislator in your district has already heard about this. He's not like the other legislators who are coming up and asking questions as if they've never heard of this concept before in their life. Like they're coming up and they're realizing that, you know what? They do, they do know what this is. They got letters from their constituents and on their own went. And in your letter, ask him, look, or her, ask them, here's what I'd like you to focus on. We're trying to get this resolution introduced. Maybe you need a sponsor. Maybe you ask them to sponsor it. Right? It just depends on everybody's individual situation, but you won't know where you're at in your state specifically until a district captain reaches out to you. And again, these folks are local. You're not getting a call from somebody in a completely different state or on the other end of the state. They're calling you from your neighborhood. They're calling you from your neighborhood because this is how the republic is supposed to operate. This is how a constitutional republic goes down. And there's nothing more powerful than exercising that, than engaging in that. There's nothing more powerful than that. So that's what I ask. That's my ask of everyone else. My next ask, I put the link to, I just started engaging Twitter or X, right? I just started engaging it because I realize my fragility on this channel. And despite, seriously approaching 18,000 followers on Facebook, I realize that I don't get distributed on Facebook. That, right now, at this moment, right, I'm an hour into this broadcast. So it's usually when things start to drop off, but I've still got 8 to 10 people fluctuating on Rumble, and I have like 3 on Facebook. So it's like, with 18,000 followers, that's insane. Now, after the broadcast, a regular live cast will normally get somewhere around, it used to at one point get over the course of like a week would get up in the thousands. Now it's in the hundreds because they shut down everything. A produced video would get 67,000 views on some of them. Now they get hundreds because Facebook is, and I'm just tired of dealing with it. And I haven't been producing videos because it's a lot of work to do that and to put it up on something like this, where, like Facebook, where, I don't know if I'm shadow banned or not. And they may have lifted it recently. They do that sometimes. I saw the followers going up. So when that happens, generally it means without me making any significant videos. And when that happens, it means they're leaving me alone for whatever reason. I don't know what the determining factors are. So I may put out a video shortly, which I do enjoy doing, but haven't done because no one gets to see it and it angers me. But that brings me back to Twitter, because while I have no following on Twitter because I've never paid attention to it, recently I have paid attention to it and I'm trying to get more active with it and I'm trying to grow the following. So, if anyone does come across this on Facebook, the link to the Twitter feed, because it's a little different in spelling, it's at Patriot Think Tank, and the NT in Patriot and the starting T in Think is one T. So it's because they made me do that. I don't understand Twitter that much, so I don't understand why, but they made me do that. So be it. But I'm starting to try and engage Twitter more often. So definitely hit me up on Twitter. If you want to, if you got something you'd like to see talked about on the broadcast. I know a lot of people message me on Facebook from all over the world, actually, which is kind of awesome. But they'll shoot me videos, they'll shoot me different stuff just to kind of go over it and see if they can, see if I'll attach to it and start talking about it. But always remember that if you come to this broadcast, I will be on every Wednesday night, and that night may change. It's always been Wednesday night, but it may change in the near future as I am trying to work on getting a co-host. So I don't have anyone selected yet, but I am working on trying to get a co-host in between everything that I do. And Wednesday seems to be a hard time for just about everybody that I've asked. So I may add an extra broadcast, or we may just move it to a different day. We'll see how that goes. You can leave in the comments if you're still around at this point what day you'd like to see if it were to change. Wednesday seems to be a little rough for everybody. So, let me know if there's a day that you would rather see it. And I'll see if there's a lot of people saying the same day. Because if that's the case, then maybe that's the day I'll pick. But until next time, folks, I just want to make sure, end this off, go to thepatriotthinktank.com, click on the front page link to the petition. It's going to take you over to Convention of States, and you'll have the ability to fill out the petition right there. And just make that your first step on the journey. Make that your first step on the journey of taking this nation back, of actually doing something, right? We all say, oh, I won't comply. I'll fight. People talk about their Second Amendment. The whole point of Article 5 is to avoid all that. It's not about whether or not you have a right to do this or that. The point is we have a process specifically designed to avoid revolution. Because revolution generally, with the exception of our own, and that experiment is still going, revolution usually doesn't end well. So let's have this end well, right? Until next time, folks, love you guys.
And like that.